Thank you very much. We are here to bring you the story behind the music you love and to introduce you to the men who make that music at Orchestra Hall. You'll also get to hear an informal and easy-to-understand discussion of music and its interesting personalities, and what's more, you, listening right now, have an opportunity to win 2 main-floor tickets for a concert by the Chicago Symphony Orchestra at Orchestra Hall. And today, let's turn to the page in your Symphony Scrapbook devoted to the violoncello. And we have with us Mr. Theodore Ratzer, member of the cello section of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. Mr. Ratzer, I'm sure our audience would like to have you identify the passage that you played at the beginning of this program. Not too well known a cello passage, I think. And perhaps play some more from that composition.
Well, it's from the prelude to the Twilight of the Gods by Wagner.
I ran across an interesting rhyme the other day about the cello, when something like this. The cello's tone is rich and broad. It's fun to play, but very hard. Its literature goes on and on, so do not overdo the swan. I know the literature of the cello is rather extensive. I've heard references to the fact that because the cello strings are rather heavy, that is in comparison to the violin, and because the bow is comparatively short compared to the length of the instrument, and because the keyboard is rather long, that it's a very difficult instrument to play. What would you say about that?
Well, I don't know. I think all instruments are rather difficult to play properly.
But as you go back in your experience, say the early days of playing the instrument, did you feel there was any special difficulty? Of course, I in a way, this is an obvious question. I know anything is easy if you know how to do it.
I think it gets tougher and tougher the farther you go.
That is, as you get nearer and nearer to the virtuoso stage, the pressure is harder.
Yes, I think so.
Have you ever played another instrument? Another string instrument?
No, never.
So you don't have much basis for comparison.
No, I have not.
But would you say among the strings, the violin, when the violinists and the violists and the cellist and the bass players get together before or after a concert or on one of the many trips that the orchestra makes during the season, do they ever talk about the comparative difficulties of the instrument, or is there sort of an ethical code which keeps them off that subject?
No, I don't think there's any code, but I don't think that the comparisons are very difficult to make between the different instrumentalists, not having played the other instruments. I think the composers write the harder things for instruments that have more facility than, like the bass that doesn't get to too many notes, like a violin.
Well, say in comparison, that leads to another question. In comparison with the classic composers, say the 3 Bs, do modern composers demand more of the orchestra players, of the instrumentalists, would you say?
Oh, yes, quite a bit more, I would say.
Is that because the instruments have been developed, or the facility of the technique of playing has been developed?
The technique of playing has made rather rapid strides, I would say.
Of course, the cello, as a cello, is not a very old instrument, comparatively speaking, is it?
Well, goes back a few years.
I mean, in its present form.
No, not in its present form.
Of course, I think not only do a lot of people misspell the word violoncello and think it has something to do with a violin when it doesn't, but I don't think very many people realize that the word, when we abbreviate it and call it just a cello, it doesn't mean anything really, as far as the word is concerned, because cello means little. And it's not a big violin, but it really is a small double bass, isn't it? And of course, the instrument, the ancestor of that, is an interesting instrument, the viola da gamba, which you had to hold between your knees. And there are two things about that interest me. One is why no one thought of putting in a peg so that you could rest it on the floor until, what was it, about 50 or 100 years ago, or 100 years ago they did that.
Something like that, I would say.
And the other interesting thing is that I read a reference somewhere, I don't know whether it's true or not, that putting the peg on and making it an instrument which rests on the floor has opened up the cello as an instrument that women could play. And someone just the other day, a member of the orchestra, told me that up until comparatively recently, I don't know whether it's just in certain countries, that the women played the cello by holding it on the side,
sort of
because it wasn't side saddle, because it wasn't dignified for them to hold it between their knees. Is that is that right? I had never heard of that. Of course, one of the great names I know in cello literature is Bach, a name that Casals, I think, has made famous. And doesn't every cellist have some Bach unaccompanied sonatas up his sleeve?
Oh, I guess so.
I was wondering if we couldn't have an illustration of that.
I'll play a little of the Bourrée in C major suite.
I'd like to ask you a question about your instrument. Is that a very old instrument?
Yes, it's a rather old instrument. It's a French cello. It was given to me by a very dear friend of mine, John Hornsteiner, that was a violin dealer here in Chicago for many, many years. In fact, from before the Chicago Symphony Orchestra was known.
He always, I never knew him very well. He used to come around to concerts very frequently. But he always impressed me as being a very interesting man. Had a very interesting face. He must have had a wonderful sense of humor.
He sure did. The amount of stories that there are about John Hornsteiner, why they're too numerous to mention.
Well, he was one of the great instrument repair.
Yes, he comes from the Hornsteiner family from Germany that's, well, dates back to the late 1600s.
Well, he was such a well-known character to all string players around here. I think it might be interesting if you told one of those anecdotes about him.
Well, I've been fishing many times with him, and, well, all the stories I can't even think of. But there's one that's rather interesting about a certain violin that was purchased, and was supposed it was a Strad violin that was bought. The purchaser, why, there was some doubt about authenticity of it, and after a year of hesitating, he finally asked John about the instrument, and John said, well, no, the top of that instrument is not genuine. Well, he says, well, how do you know it isn't genuine? Well, John says, well, I'll tell you, I made it myself.
That's very interesting. In other words, even a great violinist wasn't able to tell that.
Oh no.
I know many musicians used to come to Chicago, make a special trip here just to have their instruments looked over or checked over by John Hornsteiner.
All the great artists stopped in to see John.
Oh, I know that the cello is often assigned a very important role in symphonic compositions. They're not. What other? Is there enough cello literature to give the cellists any variety?
Well, there's
apart from the swan.
There's quite a bit, but not to the extent that there is for violin or piano, which is natural.
Well, what about the concerto literature? I know you must have some concerto in which you're especially interested.
Well, I can play a little from the stock concerto that isn't heard very much. I think it's had 2 performances here, once with Wallenstein and once with Theodore. I'll play the.
Could we have some of that? Thanks ever so much, Mr. Ratzer, for being with us today. And now we're happy to send a pair of tickets for a concert by the Chicago Symphony Orchestra to Mr. and Mrs. W.A. Anderson of Milton, Wisconsin, for their card. They tuned in on the Chicago Symphony Scrapbook last Saturday and thoroughly enjoyed it. Keep up this service. And they say, how do you know whether the anecdotes are true or does it matter? I'd say we're never sure whether the anecdotes are true. We like to receive any anecdotes connected with music, and I think it makes no difference whether they're true or not. And I'd like to refer to a card sent in by Mrs. Carolyn M. Hill, which interests us. She said, ever since I became a shut-in, I listened to your program. Sweetest selections, no wasted words, everything clear. And we thank her for sending in this card for our program.